Close your eyes for a moment and imagine you're standing in the burning heat of Texas in 1945. The sun rises slowly, stretching long shadows across the dusty earth, turning the prison camp fences into trembling silver wires. The air tastes of dust, warm metal, and the faint sweetness of pine drifting from somewhere far beyond the barracks. Compartments, a long, lonely train whistle echoing across the plains. A sound that once meant troop shipments, artillery, and boys who would never return home. Now, the sound means something different. It means arrival. It means prisoners. It means a new chapter for people who no longer know who they are. You take one step forward, the dirt crunching under your boots, and time folds around you like paper. Suddenly, you're not in the present anymore. You are inside 1945, inside the Texas sun, inside a camp where 30 German women, exhausted, starved, and hollowed out by war, are about to face a moment so simple, so painfully human, that it will break them more deeply than any battlefield ever could. Because sometimes, the smallest kindness is the sharpest blade. Sometimes, a single breakfast is powerful enough to shatter years of lies. This is the breakfast that broke them, and this is the story you were never told. Inside Barracks 14, 30 German women lie on wooden bunks made from rough pine planks. Their grey wool blankets itch against their skin, blankets made for soldiers, not women who haven't slept in days. Some stir at the train whistle. Others keep their eyes closed, wanting just a few more seconds of numbness. Their hair is cropped short, their uniforms faded, their bodies thin and tired. These are not SS guards, not hardened killers. They are nurses, clerks, radio operators, signal corps members, pieces of a collapsing world. On the third bunk from the end, Anna Weiss, 26, pushes herself upright. She was once a nurse in Hamburg, once someone who believed she could help people. Now, she runs her fingers over the coarse seam of her blanket. A loose stitch scratches her skin. She tries to ignore the ache in her stomach, a constant, gnawing emptiness she has carried for months. For the first time in a long time, the air is quiet. No air raid sirens, no bombs, no German voices barking orders, only birds and the low hum of a distant truck. Then a voice cuts through the stillness, English, calm, measured, almost gentle. "Breakfast in 10 minutes. The word slides into the barracks slowly. Breakfast. Back home, breakfast during the war meant stale bread, if anything. Coffee made from roasted barley. Eggs were a memory. Bacon was a dream. Across from Anna, Greta Muller, sharp-eyed and stubborn, sits up. Greta was once a typist for an infantry regiment. War had carved her into granite. "They'll feed us scraps, just enough to keep us alive. Don't expect kindness from the enemy." Anna doesn't answer. She quietly presses her palm to her hollow stomach. It growls, a soft, embarrassed reminder that she is still human, still alive, still hungry. The women had been captured in France during the final collapse, the days when German units surrendered in clusters, when officers vanished, when surrender felt less like failure and more like the final breath after drowning. Their journey to Texas was a kind of waking nightmare. Days on a troop ship that reeked of diesel, sweat, and disinfectant, salt crusting their clothes, wind lashing the deck, the ocean stretching endlessly in every direction. Inside the ship's hold, they whispered dark rumors, the only currency they had left. They'll make us clean their streets. The Americans torture women. They'll starve us. They kill prisoners. Propaganda had been their compass, and that compass pointed only toward fear. Because then something strange happened. The American guards offered water, cigarettes, occasionally even a piece of hard chocolate. Kindness, real kindness, confused them more than cruelty ever could. And when they arrived in New York, their fear fractured. Towering skyscrapers untouched by bombs, children laughing on street corners, shop windows filled with food, neon lights glowing bright against the evening sky. It felt obscene, a world that had never burned, a world that... Anna wrote a diary entry on the ship, "The Lord Americans in the future. The top of the chalk is grow and self-struggle." It felt obscene, a world that had never burned, a world that had never starved, and they pointed make a prisons of fear. It felt obscene, a world that had never burned, a world that had never starved. Once to be the future was the Junely different them from the future. Kindness, there was filled right now, a bit of a school, despite it chocolate, the growth and scarities, the disgust of more. But when they arrived in New York, they felt obscene, a world that had never burned, a world that had never starved, and felt obscene, a world that had never burned, a world that had never starved. It felt obscene, a world that had never starved, and felt obscene, a world that had never starved. Anna wrote a diary entry on the ship. "The American guards orphaned in America, they will sieved every life, and must have community of world." Anna wrote a diary entry on the ship. "They felt obscene, a world that had never burned, a world that had never starved. The growth and scarities, the disgust of more. But when they arrived in New York, they felt obscene, a world that had never starved, and felt obscene, a world that had never starved, and felt obscene, a world that had never starved." Anna wrote a diary entry on the ship. "The growth in scarities, the disgust of more." Anna wrote a diary entry on the ship. "The best thing that will be through. They felt obscene, a world that had never starved. It felt obscene, a world that had never starved, and felt obscene, a world that had never starved." Anna wrote a diary entry on the ship. "Only crown a diary entry on the train south. The fields go on forever. No ruins, no hunger. It feels like another planet. I don't know whether to feel grateful or ashamed." When the train reached Texas, the women were taken to Camp Hearn, a POW camp made entirely of wooden structures. No iron gates, no dogs, no German slogans carved into stone. Just a simple wooden sign, "PW Compound C." The heat struck them first, dry, blunt, merciless. Dust clung to their uniforms, to their skin, to their memories. American soldiers stood watching, not with hatred, but with quiet curiosity. It was the first sign that the enemy did not look like the monsters they had imagined. They were led to the mess hall, a simple building made from pine boards. And that was where the moment happened. The moment that would change everything. The smell hit them first. Coffee. Real coffee. Not barley, not burned grain. Actual, rich, warm coffee. And bacon. And eggs. Something frying softly on a hot pan, crackling like applause in the distance. On every table sat metal trays filled with food the women had not seen in years. Bacon, eggs, toast, butter, cold milk beading with condensation. Greta's voice cracked. "It's a trick." No one moved. Some stared so hard their eyes burned. Others looked away, unable to face memories the smell awoke inside them. Anna's breath trembled. The bacon's scent carried her back through rubble and years to her mother's kitchen in Hamburg, to a time before the bombs, before uniforms, before war. "Go on, ladies, eat." Their hands shook as they picked up their forks. Women who had held dying soldiers now trembled in front of a plate of food. Anna lifted her first bite, and the moment the salt touched her tongue, something inside her cracked. Quietly, irreversibly. Embarked her, women cried silently. One covered her face, another whispered a shaky prayer, even though she hadn't prayed in years. The bacon tasted of home, and I hated myself for wanting more. Exit. Days turned into weeks. But that first morning never really ended. It lingered on every plate, in every swallow, in every guilty glance at a full tray. Every day, the routine repeated itself. Line up. File into the mess hall. Smell the coffee. See the bacon. Feel the same quiet shock. The portions were not luxurious, but compared to the hunger devouring Germany, it was abundance. Letters from home began to arrive, each one a piece of a country that no longer existed. Hamburg, Dresden, Cologne, cities reduced to ash and brick. Mothers wrote of standing in line for hours for a loaf of bread that never came, of trading wedding rings for potatoes, of children fainting in school. Anna read each letter slowly, then folded it with shaking hands and hid it under her thin mattress. How can I swallow when my brother starves? Each bite I take feels like betrayal. Around her, similar conflicts played out silently in the lines for food, in the way women hesitated over second helpings, in the way some pushed part of their tray aside and stared at it as if it were a moral test. They'd been raised to believe that sacrifice was holy, that suffering proved loyalty, that the enemy was less than human. Now, under the Texas sun, they were being forced to confront a different kind of torment, to be treated with decency by the people they'd been taught to hate. Camp Hearn had rules, roll calls, curfews, work details. But what it didn't have was the constant cruelty they'd come to expect from authority. The guards addressed them by rank and by miss, not by number. They were allowed to attend English classes, painting workshops, even put on small plays in the evenings. The fences were there, a hard, unbreakable line. But on either side of that wire, the people slowly began to look less like caricatures of enemy and more like people. One evening, an American sergeant lugged a gramophone into the corner of the mess hall. He cranked it, placed a record, and a burst of brass and clarinet flooded the room. Benny Goodman. They didn't know the name yet, but they felt the rhythm. The music swung, rose and fell, laughed and danced, with a kind of joy they hadn't heard since before the war. For some, it was unbearable. Greta turned her face away, jaw clenched. "Propaganda," she muttered. "They want us to forget who we are." But not everyone could look away. Some of the women's feet began to tap under the tables, almost against their will. A few closed their eyes and let the sound pull them back to dances in city squares, to radios in warm living rooms, to a time before uniforms and marching songs turned music into a weapon. Anna watched the American sergeant standing beside the gramophone. He tapped his boot in time with the rhythm. His face, in that moment, held no hatred, no triumph, just the tired relief of a man who'd found a song that reminded him of home. The realization settled over her like a soft, heavy blanket. The enemy looked terribly human. Sundays felt like stolen time. Work was lighter, the guard rotations slower, and beyond the camp's outer fence, the women could see Texas families spreading blankets on the grass. From the shade of the barracks, they watched children chase each other with kites, watched women in floral dresses unpack baskets of food, watched men lay back on the ground and look up at a sky that no longer held danger. For the German women, it was like staring through a window into an alternate universe, a universe where war had been a faraway headline, not a daily firestorm. One Sunday afternoon, a little American girl wandered close to the wire. Her hair was in braids, her dress had blue flowers. In her small hand, she held a red apple. Cockily, Ritali on the other side of the fence, drawn by the unthinking, almost animal magnetism of the fruit. The girl looked at her for a moment, not flinching, not afraid, then slipped the apple through a small gap in the wire. Here, the guard watching the scene did not shout, did not snatch it away. He simply watched, expression unreadable, as Anna hesitated, then took it. Obtaining. Apple's skin was flawless, unbruised, a red so rich it almost looked painted. I ate it slowly, to make it last. With each bite, I thought of Hamburg, of my mother trading her wedding ring for a sack of potatoes. This apple could feed a family for a day. The sweetness stayed on her tongue long after the fruit was gone. So did the shame. And the question, why would a child raised in safety offer kindness to a stranger taught to be her enemy? Winter arrived quietly in Texas. It did not come with ice storms or snowdrifts. It came with cooler mornings, longer shadows, breath visible in the early air. For the women of Barracks 14, the season felt wrong, too mild, too bright, too alive, for a world that was supposed to be in mourning. Near Christmas, the American guards decorated the mess hall. Pine branches hung on the walls, releasing a sharp, green scent that snapped memories to life. Paper stars were strung overhead. Someone scrounged up candles. Bars, they were allowed, just for one night, to sing. Stille Nacht rose from 30 tired throats and filled the wooden hall like a ghost. For a few minutes, there were no uniforms, no fences, no flags. Only a song, trying to remember who they had been before the shouting started. After the carol, the Americans brought out trays of food, roast turkey, potatoes, gravy, even pie. The women stared in silence. The contrast between that table and the letters from home was almost too much to bear. Rotations. Do they mock us with this? Anna shook her head slowly. No, I think they pity us. Later that night, a letter arrived from Hamburg. Anna opened it by the dim light of a barracks lantern. Her mother's handwriting had turned shaky and thin. Your brother is gone. The city is ash, but the lilac tree still blooms in the courtyard every spring. Bottoms pressed the paper to her lips, tasting the salt of her own tears. The camp, with its full plates and bright electric lights, suddenly felt grotesque, too alive. Part of her longed for the darkness again, not because she missed the bombs, but because in the darkness, her guilt didn't have so much space to breathe. We were raised to believe mercy is weakness, but what if cruelty was the lie all along? A week later, after another breakfast of eggs and toast, Anna remained sitting while the others drifted away. Her hands curled around a cup of coffee, gone lukewarm. An American cook wiped his hands on a towel and walked over. He was broad-shouldered, his face lined with sun and fatigue. Not a movie villain, not a propaganda poster monster. Just a man who looked like he had seen too much and slept too little. Not miss home? Anna hesitated. Her English was broken, but his tone was clear. She nodded. Yes, even when there is nothing left of it. The cook looked down, his jaw tightening. My brother fought in France. He didn't make it back. The silence that followed was heavy, but not hostile. Two people, on opposite sides of a war, sat at the same table, breathing the same air, both mourning someone the other had never met. For a moment, enemy and prisoner vanished. There was only grief, and the strange, fragile bridge built by a shared loss. That night, when Anna finally slept, she dreamed of her brother, not in uniform, not in rubble, just sitting at a breakfast table, laughing. In the dream, there were no flags, no anthems, only sunlight and the smell of bacon. Spring of 1946 crept in with warm mornings and cool nights. Rumors began to spread like whispers, slipping between bunks. They're sending us home. Home. The word no longer meant what it once had. Home was ruins, graves, fragments of families. Home meant walking through streets that no longer recognized you. On the morning of their departure, the women of Barracks 14 gathered in the mess hall one last time. Sunlight slanted through the windows, painting long golden bars on the floorboards. The smell was the same as that first morning. Bacon, eggs, toast, coffee. Anna sat at the end of the table, her hands wrapped around her cup as if trying to memorize its warmth. The creak of the benches, the clatter of cutlery, a laugh from the kitchen. Every detail pressed itself into her memory like a photograph. Across from her, Greta pushed her food around her tray without appetite. "I don't want to go back," she whispered. "There's nothing left." Anna looked at her for a long moment, then nodded, eyes stinging. "I know, but we must. Whatever is left, it is still ours." The cook from before came by their table one last time. He didn't bring extra food, he didn't say much. "Safe journey, Miss Weiss." Anna hesitated, then stood. She extended her hand. He took it, surprised, his rough palm warm against hers. In her other hand, hidden inside her sleeve, she held a small American spoon. She had taken it that morning, quietly, guiltily. The metal was cool, marked by tiny scratches. Ordinary, and yet not. "To remember," she murmured to herself. The trucks rumbled away from Camp Hearn, kicking up clouds of dust that hung in the air like ghosts. Through the slats in the wooden sides, the women saw fields, barns, a sky so blue it almost felt like an insult. The smell of breakfast lingered on their clothes, smoke, fat, coffee. It clung to them like a memory they weren't sure they had the right to keep. On the ship back to Germany, the nights were long and cold. In her bunk, Anna opened her diary one last time. "I thought I knew the enemy. I thought mercy was a weapon, and kindness a trap. But the morning of bacon and eggs broke something inside me. It showed me that cruelty had stolen our souls long before we lost the war. Perhaps humanity is not a country at all, but a choice we make, even in captivity." When the ship finally docked in Bremerhaven, the air that met them was colder, heavier, thick with coal smoke, and the ghosts of cities burned down to their foundations. Anna stepped onto German soil that felt familiar and foreign in the same breath. She looked east, toward ruins and unanswered questions. In her palm, she still held the small American spoon. She lifted it toward the grey sky, letting the weak light catch on its dull metal. A faint smile touched her lips. To remember. For a heartbeat, she could almost taste the bacon again, the taste of shame, survival, and something that felt dangerously close to grace. The camp in Texas would one day be dismantled, the barracks torn down, the fences removed, the mess hall converted, repurposed, or left to rot. No memorial might mark where 30 German women once sat in stunned silence over plates of food they didn't think they deserved. But the real monument was not in the wood or the wire. It was in the way those breakfasts rewrote something deep inside the women who ate them. They broke the story they had been told since childhood. The story that said, the enemy is a monster, mercy is weakness, kindness is a lie. They discovered that the enemy could feed you while your own country starved you. That the enemy could look at you and see a person, while your own leaders had treated you like a tool. Years later, some of those women would tell their children and grandchildren about a strange season of their lives spent behind fences under a foreign sun. They would talk about the cruelty of war, the cities turned to ash, the brothers who never came back. And then, quietly, they would talk about breakfast, about bacon and eggs served by hands they had once feared, about how the first bite hurt more than hunger, because it forced them to admit that the world was not as simple as the slogans they had memorized. If there is a lesson in that Texas mess hall, it is this. Propaganda can tell you who to hate, war can give you reasons to obey, but in the end, humanity is something we choose, again and again, in moments as small as sliding a plate across a table or sharing an apple through a fence. Sometimes, the greatest victory in war is not won on a battlefield, but at a breakfast table, where one person looks at another and decides, if I have enough, you won't go hungry today. And sometimes, the deepest shock is not a bomb or a bullet, but the realization that the person you were taught to fear is the one who shows you what mercy looks like. This was the breakfast that broke them. Not because it destroyed them, but because it broke the lies that had held them prisoner long before the fences ever did.